Hi, everybody. How are you today? Well, I'm glad that you guys are doing good. Sorry, this is a recording. My cat Princess wasn't feeling good today, so I took her into emergency right when it opened, and we had to wait a really long time because other people have more serious conditions with their pets. But yeah, her eyes have been bothering her. I guess it's allergy related, but she was scratching her eyes, and then she's been having like green stuff coming out of it. And I was just really concerned, so I just took her in. She's my same one that had to have surgery when she was little. She always gets sick, so my cats are like my baby, especially Princess. You guys know Princess, the one with the blue eyes. So yeah, so she got ointment. They dilated her eyes and checked. So it was a big deal. But thank you for your prayers. I know that she's just an animal, but if you have dogs and cats, you know how they are. They're like our babies, they're part of your family. So we're gonna go ahead and continue with our discussion for today. So remember in this book, in the chapter here, we go to the section where it says business communication for success. And last week we stopped on the nonverbal deliveries. We're going to talk about that today. Nonverbal delivery. The most important thing in communication is hearing what isn't said. Peter F. Drucker said that. And Abraham Maslow said the behavior of the human being is sometimes a defense, a way of concealing motives and thoughts. And Charles Dickens said electric communication will never be a substitute for the face of somebody who, with their soul, encourages another person to be brave and true. For your homework this week, we were doing your midterm. So make sure you do it. You have 2 weeks to do it. So if you didn't do it, don't worry, don't stress. You still have another week. And this is the whole chapter about nonverbal. So how do you know when your boss or instructors are pleased with your progress or not? You might know from the smiles on their faces from time to time, attention they give to you, or perhaps in other nonverbal ways, like a raise or bonus or good grade. Whether the interaction takes place face to face or at a distance, you can still experience and interpret nonverbal responses. Sometimes we place more emphasis on nonverbal aspects of communication than warrant. Suppose you have gotten home from your first date with Amanda and you feel it went very well. How soon should you call Amanda? There are lots of advice columns, formal rules and customs, and friends with opinions to offer you suggestions, but you know what's right for you. You also know that texting at 5 o'clock the next morning might be a little bit early. You might choose to wait until a coffee break around 10 a.m. to send a short text message and realize that you might not get the response until later the afternoon. Does lack of immediate response have any meaning? Does it mean Amanda's less interested in you than you are in her? Well, it might give you more attention than you deserve. It might weigh on your mind and distract you from other tasks. The time interval for responding may have so much intentional meaning as you think. It might mean that Amanda has a different sense of time urgency than you do, or she simply doesn't receive your message until later. Timing is an important aspect of nonverbal communication, but trying to understand what single example of timing means is challenging. Context may make a difference. For example, if you have known somebody for years who's always responded promptly to your emails or your texts, but now that person hasn't responded over a day, you may have reason for concern. That person's behavior doesn't match what you are familiar with, and all of a sudden, unexplained change in the established pattern may mean that you may need to follow up. Here's some nonverbal principles of nonverbal communication. Demonstrative nonverbal communication and describe the role of the communication process. Understand and explain the principles of nonverbal communication. Chances are you had many experiences where words were misunderstood or where the meaning of the words was unclear. When it comes to nonverbal communication, meaning is even harder to discern. We can sometimes tell what people are communicating through their nonverbal communication, but there's no foolproof dictionary on how to interpret nonverbal messages. Nonverbal communication is a process of conveying a message without the use of words. It can include gestures, facial expressions, tone of voice, timing, posture, and where you stand as you communicate. It can help or hinder the clear understanding of your message, and it doesn't reveal or even mask what you're thinking. Nonverbal communication is far from simple, and its complexity makes your study and understanding a worthy but challenging goal. Where does the wink start and nod end? Nonverbal communication involves the entire body, space it occupies and dominates, the time it interacts, and not only what is said, but also not to sit confused. Try to focus on just one element of verbal communication, and it will soon get lost among all the other stimuli. Let's consider eye contact. What does it mean by oneself without context? Chin position or eyebrows to flag interest or signal threat. Nonverbal action flows almost seamlessly from one to the next, making it a challenge to interpret one element or even a series of elements. We perceive time as linear, following along in a straight line. We did one task, we're making another task now, and we're planning on doing something else all the time. Sometimes we place more emphasis on the future or in the past, forgetting that we actually living in the present moment, whether we focus on it or now or not. Nonverbal communication is always in motion. As long as it's same as never or same twice. Right? We're always changing. Nonverbal communication is irreversible. In written communication, you can write a clarification, you can do a correction, you can do a redirection. While it never makes the original statement go completely away, it does allow for correction. Unlike written communication, oral communication may allow do-overs on the spot. You can explain or restate, hoping to clarify your point. You can also dig in a hole if you're a little bit deeper. The old saying is when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging and open the mouth and insert foot. That can sometimes apply to oral communication. We've all said that we would give anything to take back, but we know we can't. Oral communication, like written communication, allows for correction, but it still doesn't erase the original message or its impact. Nonverbal communication takes it one step further. You can't separate the nonverbal action from context of the other verbal and the nonverbal communication acts. You can't take it back. In speech, nonverbal communication is continuous in the sense it's always occurring because it's fluid. It can be hard to determine whether one nonverbal message starts and another one stops. The words can be easily identified and isolated, but we can try to single out a speaker's gesture, smile, or stance without looking at how they all came together in context. We can miss the point and draw a wrong conclusion. You may need to be conscious of the aspect of the public speaking because it, quote, another old saying, actions speak louder than words. This is true in the sense that people often pay more attention to your nonverbal expressions more than your words. As a result, nonverbal communication is a powerful way to contribute or detract from your success in communicating your message to your audiences. Nonverbal communication is fast. Let's pretend that you are at your computer at work. You see that an email has arrived and you're right in the middle of tallying a spreadsheet whose numbers just don't add up. You see the email is from a coworker and you click on it. The subject line reads pink slips. You could interpret this to mean a suggestion for Halloween costume or a challenge for a race in another's car ownership. But in this context, in the workplace, it assumes layoffs. Your emotional response is immediate. If the author of the email could see your face, they would know that the response was disbelief or frustration, even anger, all via your nonverbal communication. Yes, when a tree falls in a forest, it makes a sound, even if no one's there to hear it. In the same way, you express yourself via nonverbal communication all the time without much conscious thought about it. You may think about how to share the news with your partner and try to display a smile and a sense of calm when you feel like nothing but smiling. Nonverbal communication gives our thoughts and feelings away before we're even aware that we are even thinking how we feel. People may see and hear more than they have ever anticipated. Your nonverbal communication includes both internal and internal messages. But since it all happens so fast, the unintentional ones can contradict what you've already been supposed or you're supposed to react. Nonverbal communication can add or replace verbal communication. People tend to pay attention to how they say it rather than what they actually say. In presenting a speech, this is particularly true. We communicate verbally more than we engage in verbal communication, and we often use nonverbal communication to do so, or even replace words that might be otherwise. Nonverbal gestures call the illustrator to communicate our message effectively and reinforce your point. Your coworker Andrew may ask you Barry's bar after work, and he walks by, and simply you nod and say, yeah. And Andrew may respond with a nonverbal gesture like an emblem by signaling okay, and then he walks away. In addition to the illustrators and symbolic nonverbal communication, we also use regulators. Regulators are nonverbal messages which control, maintain, or discourage interaction. And this is from the basics of speech communication. And let's say you're in a meeting presenting a speech that introduces your company's latest product. If your audience members nod their heads in agreement to the important points and they maintain good eye contact, it's a good sign. Now, verbally, they are using regulators, encouraging you to continue your presentation. In fact, if they look away and they tap their feet and they begin drawing the margins in their notebooks, these are regulators suggesting that it's better to think of a way and regain the interest or else wrap up your presentation quickly. The effect displays are nonverbal communication and express emotions and feelings. An effect display might be a company holding your hand, where silence would be a frown and shake your head from side to side. Then when you and Andrews smiling, waving coworkers who arrive, lets them know that you're seated and welcomes them. We have adapters. Those are displays of nonverbal communication that help you adapt your environment to each context, helping you feel comfortable and secure. The basics of speech communication. We have a self-adapter, involves your meeting your need for security by playing with your hair, for example, or adapting something by yourself in a way that's not designed or apparent for purpose. Combing your hair, the example of purpose action, like a self-adaptive behavior. We have object adapter, involves the use of an object in a way which is designed. You may see your audience members tapping their pencils, chewing on them, or playing with them while ignoring your presentation. That happens too. Here's some terms that you may have heard with nonverbal expressions, like adapters, help us feel comfortable or indicate emotions or moods. Effect displays, express emotions or feelings, complementing, reinforcing verbal communication. Contracting verbal communication. Emblems is nonverbal gestures that carry a specific meaning, can replace or reinforce words. Illustrators reinforce a verbal message. Masking, substituting more appropriate displays for less appropriate displays. Object adapters, using an object for a purpose other than what's intended. Regulators control, encourage or discourage interaction. Repeating verbal communication. Replacing verbal communication. Self-adapters, adapting something about yourself in a way that's designed or for no adapt purpose. Nonverbal communication is universal. Consider how many contexts in which interaction occurs during the day, in the morning, at work, after work, home, with friends, with family. So if you're born in a different country to different parents and perhaps a member of opposite sex, your whole world would be quite different. Yet nonverbal communication remain universally constant. It may not look the same or get used in the same way, but it's still nonverbal communication, the functions and displays. Nonverbal communication is confusing and contextual. It can be confusing. We need to context clues, help understand or begin to understand what movement, gesture, or lack displays mean. We also have to figure out, based on our knowledge or lack of therefore, if a person or hope can get it right. Talk about a challenge. Nonverbal communication is everywhere. We still use it, but that doesn't make it simple or independent of when, where, why, or how we communicate. We believe nonverbal communication more than verbal, but building on the example of responding to the situation with facial gestures associated with frustration, before or after you attempt to think appropriate verbal response, let's ask a question. What would you believe, somebody's actions or the words? According to William Slyler and Melissa Bale, most people tend to believe the nonverbal message over the verbal message. People will never answer the actions speak louder than words and place a disproportionate emphasis on nonverbal. Still place more confidence on the nonverbal communication, particularly when it comes to lying behaviors. According to Marion Zuckerman, Bella DiPaolo, and Robert Rothel, there are several behaviors people display when they're being disruptive. Verbal and nonverbal communication and deception, advances in experimental psychology, reduction in eye contact while engaging in conversation, awkward pauses in conversation, higher pitch in the voice, deliberate pronunciation, articulation of words, increased delay in response time to a question, increased body movements like changes in the posture, and decreased smiling, decreased rate of speech. So nonverbal communication is a process of conveying a message without the use of it. It relates to the dynamic process of communication, the perception process of listening, and verbal communication. Verbal communication is fluid and fast, universal, confusing, contextual, and it add or replace verbal communication and intentional or unintentional. Nonverbal communication communicates feelings and attitudes, and people tend to believe nonverbal messages more than verbal ones. Hold on 1 second. I have a video to show you. Okay, this one you may have seen in my other classes. This is your body language may affect who you are.
Friends would walk up to me and just be like, "What the f is in your mug?" And I would just tell them.
Sorry, these commercials, I always have to watch them.
So I want to start by offering you a free, no-tech life hack. And all it requires of you is this, that you change your posture for 2 minutes. But before I give it away, I want to ask you to right now do a little audit of your body and what you're doing with your body. So how many of you are sort of making yourselves smaller? Maybe you're hunching, crossing your legs, maybe wrapping your ankles. Sometimes we hold on to our arms like this. Sometimes we spread out. I see you. So I want you to pay attention to what you're doing right now. We're going to come back to that in a few minutes, and I'm hoping that if you sort of learn to tweak this a little bit, it could significantly change the way your life unfolds. So we're really fascinated with body language, and we're particularly interested in other people's body language. You know, we're interested in, like, you know, an awkward interaction or a smile or a contemptuous glance or maybe a very awkward wink or maybe even something like a handshake.
Here they are arriving at number 10 and look at this lucky policeman gets to shake hands with the President of the United States. Oh, and here comes the Prime Minister of the... No.
So a handshake or the lack of a handshake can have us talking for weeks and weeks and weeks, even the BBC and the New York Times. So obviously, when we think about nonverbal behavior or body language, but we call it nonverbals as social scientists, it's language. So we think about communication. When we think about communication, we think about interactions. So what is your body language communicating to me? What's mine communicating to you? And there's a lot of reason to believe that this is a valid way to look at this. So social scientists have spent a lot of time looking at the effects of our body language or other people's body language on judgments. And we make sweeping judgments and inferences from body language. And those judgments can predict really meaningful life outcomes like who we hire or promote, who we ask out on a date. For example, Nalini Ambady, a researcher at Tufts University, shows that when people watch 30-second soundless clips of real physician-patient interactions, their judgments of the physician's niceness predict whether or not that physician will be sued. So it doesn't have to do so much with whether or not that physician was incompetent, but do we like that person and how they interacted? Even more dramatic, Alex Todorov at Princeton has shown us that judgments of political candidates' faces in just 1 second predict 70% of US Senate and gubernatorial race outcomes. And even, let's go digital, emoticons used well in online negotiations can lead you to claim more value from that negotiation. If you use them poorly, bad idea, right? So when we think of nonverbals, we think of how we judge others, how they judge us, and what the outcomes are. We tend to forget, though, the other audience that's influenced by our nonverbals, and that's ourselves. We are also influenced by our nonverbals, our thoughts and our feelings and our physiology. So what nonverbals am I talking about? I'm a social psychologist, I study prejudice, and I teach at a competitive business school. So it was inevitable that I would become interested in power dynamics. I became especially interested in nonverbal expressions of power and dominance. And what are nonverbal expressions of power and dominance? Well, this is what they are. So in the animal kingdom, they are about expanding. So you make yourself big, you stretch out, you take up space, you're basically opening up. It's about opening up. And this is true across the animal kingdom. It's not just limited to primates, and humans do the same thing. So they do this both when they have power sort of chronically, and also when they're feeling powerful in the moment. And this one is especially interesting because it really shows us how universal and old these expressions of power are. This expression, which is known as pride, Jessica Tracy has studied, she shows that people who are born with sight and people who are congenitally blind do this when they win at a physical competition. So when they cross the finish line and they've won, it doesn't matter if they've never seen anyone do it, they do this. So the arms up in the V, the chin is slightly lifted. What do we do when we feel powerless? We do exactly the opposite. We close up, we wrap ourselves up, we make ourselves small. We don't want to bump into the person next to us. So again, both animals and humans do the same thing. And this is what happens when you put together high and low power. So what we tend to do when it comes to power is that we complement the other's nonverbals. So if someone's being really powerful with us, we tend to make ourselves smaller. We don't mirror them, we do the opposite of them. So I'm watching this behavior in the classroom, and what do I notice? I notice that MBA students really exhibit the full range of power nonverbals. So you have people who are like caricatures of alphas, like really coming into the room. They get right into the middle of the room before class even starts, like they really want to occupy space. When they sit down, they're sort of spread out. They raise their hands like this. You have other people who are virtually collapsing when they come in. As soon as they come in, you see it. You see it on their faces and their bodies, and they sit in their chair and they make themselves tiny, and they go like this when they raise their hand. I noticed a couple things about this. One, you're not going to be surprised. It seems to be related to gender. So women are much more likely to do this kind of thing than men. Women feel chronically less powerful than men, so this is not surprising. But the other thing I noticed is that it also seemed to be related to the extent to which the students were participating and how well they were participating. And this is really important in the MBA classroom because participation counts for half the grade. So business schools have been struggling with this gender grade gap. You get these equally qualified women and men coming in, and then you get these differences in grades, and it seems to be partly attributable to participation. So I started to wonder, okay, so you have these people coming in like this, and they're participating. Is it possible that we could get people to fake it, and would it lead them to participate more? So my main collaborator, Dana Carney, who's at Berkeley, and I really wanted to know, can you fake it till you make it? Like, can you do this just for a little while and actually experience a behavioral outcome that makes you seem more powerful? So we know that our nonverbals govern how other people think and feel about us. There's a lot of evidence, but our question really was, do our nonverbals govern how we think and feel about ourselves? There's some evidence that they do. So, for example, when we smile when we feel happy, but also when we're forced to smile by holding a pen in our teeth like this, it makes us feel happy. So it goes both ways. When it comes to power, it also goes both ways. So when you feel powerful, you're more likely to do this, but it's also possible that when you pretend to be powerful, you are more likely to actually feel powerful. So the second question really was, so we know that our minds change our bodies, but is it also true that our bodies change our minds? And when I say minds, in the case of the powerful, what am I talking about? So I'm talking about thoughts and feelings and the sort of physiological things that make up our thoughts and feelings. And in my case, that's hormones. I look at hormones. So what do the minds of the powerful versus the powerless look like? So powerful people tend to be, not surprisingly, more assertive and more confident, more optimistic. They actually feel that they're going to win even at games of chance. They also tend to be able to think more abstractly. So there are a lot of differences. They take more risks. There are a lot of differences between powerful and powerless people. Physiologically, there also are differences on two key hormones, testosterone, which is the dominance hormone, and cortisol, which is the stress hormone. So what we find is that high-power alpha males in primate hierarchies have high testosterone and low cortisol. And powerful and effective leaders also have high testosterone and low cortisol. So what does that mean? When you think about power, people tended to think only about testosterone because that was about dominance. But really, power is also about how you react to stress. So do you want the high-power leader that's dominant, high on testosterone, but really stress reactive? Probably not, right? You want the person who's powerful and assertive and dominant, but not very stress reactive, the person who's laid back. So we know that in primate hierarchies, if an alpha needs to take over, if an individual needs to take over an alpha role sort of suddenly, within a few days, that individual's testosterone has gone up significantly and his cortisol has dropped significantly. So we have this evidence, both that the body can shape the mind, at least at the facial level, and also that role changes can shape the mind. So what happens, okay, you take a role change, what happens if you do that at a really minimal level, like this tiny manipulation, this tiny intervention? For 2 minutes you say, I want you to stand like this, and it's going to make you feel more powerful. So this is what we did. We decided to bring people into the lab and run a little experiment. And these people adopted for 2 minutes either high power poses or low power poses. And I'm just going to show you 5 of the poses, although they took on only 2. So here's one, a couple more. This one has been dubbed the Wonder Woman by the media. Here are a couple more. So you can be standing or you can be sitting. And here are the low power poses. So you're folding up, you're making yourself small. This one is very low power. When you're touching your neck, you're really kind of protecting yourself. So this is what happens. They come in, they spit into a vial. We, for 2 minutes, say, you need to do this or this. They don't look at pictures of the poses. We don't want to prime them with the concept of power. We want them to be feeling power, right? So 2 minutes they do this. We then ask them, how powerful do you feel on a series of items? And then we give them an opportunity to gamble. And then we take another saliva sample. That's it. That's the whole experiment. So this is what we find. Risk tolerance, which is the gambling. What we find is that when you're in the high power pose condition, 86% of you will gamble. When you're in the low power pose condition, only 60%. And that's a pretty whopping significant difference. Here's what we find on testosterone. From their baseline when they come in, high power people experience about a 20% increase, and low power people experience about a 10% decrease. So again, 2 minutes and you get these changes. Here's what you get on cortisol. High power people experience about a 25% decrease, and the low power people experience about a 15% increase. So 2 minutes lead to these hormonal changes that configure your brain to basically be either assertive, confident, and comfortable, or really stress reactive, and feeling sort of shut down. And we've all had that feeling, right? So it seems that our nonverbals do govern how we think and feel about ourselves. So it's not just others, but it's also ourselves. Also, our bodies change our minds. But the next question, of course, is, can power posing for a few minutes really change your life in meaningful ways? So this is in the lab, it's this little task, it's just a couple of minutes. Where can you actually apply this, which we cared about, of course. And so we think it's really, what what matters, I mean, where you want to use this is evaluative situations, like social threat situations. Where are you being evaluated? Either by your friends, like for teenagers, it's at the lunchroom table. It could be, for some people, it's speaking at a school board meeting. It might be giving a pitch or giving a talk like this or doing a job interview. We decided that the one that most people could relate to, because most people had been through, was the job interview. So we published these findings, and the media are all over it, and they say, okay, so this is what you do when you go in for the job interview, right? So we were, of course, horrified and said, oh my God, no, that's not what we meant at all for numerous reasons. No, don't do that. Again, this is not about you talking to other people, it's you talking to yourself. What do you do before you go into a job interview? You do this. Right? You're sitting down, you're looking at your iPhone or your Android, not trying to leave anyone out. You're looking at your notes, you're hunching up, making yourself small, when really what you should be doing maybe is this, like in the bathroom, right? Do that, find 2 minutes. So that's what we want to test, okay? So we bring people into a lab and they do either high or low power poses again. They go through a very stressful job interview. It's 5 minutes long. They are being recorded, they're being judged also, and the judges are trained to give no nonverbal feedback. So they look like this. Like, imagine this is the person interviewing you. So for 5 minutes, nothing. And this is worse than being heckled. People hate this. It's what Marianne LaFrance calls standing in social quicksand. So this really spikes your cortisol. So this is the job interview we put them through because we really wanted to see what happened. We then have these coders look at these tapes, 4 of them. They're blind to the hypothesis, they're blind to the conditions. They have no idea who's been posing in what pose. And they end up looking at these sets of tapes and they say, oh, we want to hire these people, all the high power posers. We don't want to hire these people. We also evaluate these people much more positively overall. But what's driving it? It's not about the content of the speech. It's about the presence that they're bringing to the speech. We also, because we rate them on all these variables related to sort of competence, like how well structured is the speech? How good is it? What are their qualifications? No effect on those things. This is what's affected, these kinds of things. People are bringing their true selves, basically. They're bringing themselves. They bring their ideas, but as themselves, with no, residue over them. So this is what's driving the effect or mediating the effect. So when I tell people about this, that our bodies change our minds and our minds can change our behavior and our behavior can change our outcomes, they say to me, it feels fake, right? So I said fake it till you make it. It's not me. I don't want to get there and then still feel like a fraud. I don't want to feel like an imposter. I don't want to get there only to feel like I'm not supposed to be here. And that really resonated with me because I want to tell you a little story about being an imposter and feeling like I'm not supposed to be here. When I was 19, I was in a really bad car accident. I was thrown out of a car, rolled several times. I was thrown from the car, and I woke up in a head injury rehab ward, and I had been withdrawn from college, and I learned that my IQ had dropped by 2 standard deviations, which was very traumatic. I knew my IQ because I had identified with being smart, and I had been called gifted as a child. So I'm taken out of college. I keep trying to go back. They say, you're not going to finish college. There are other things for you to do, but that's not going to work out for you. So I really struggled with this. And I have to say, having your identity taken from you, your core identity, and for me it was being smart, having that taken from you, there's nothing that leaves you feeling more powerless than that. So I felt entirely powerless. I worked and worked and worked, and I got lucky and worked and got lucky and worked. Eventually, I graduated from college. It took me 4 years longer than my peers. And I convinced someone, my angel advisor, Susan Fisk, to take me on. And so I ended up at Princeton, and I was like, I am not supposed to be here. I am an imposter. And the night before my first year talk, and the first year talk at Princeton is a 20-minute talk to 20 people. That's it. I was so afraid of being found out the next day that I called her and said, I'm quitting. She was like, you are not quitting because I took a gamble on you and you're staying. You're going to stay, and this is what you're going to do. You're going to fake it. You're going to do every talk that you ever get asked to do. You're just going to do it and do it and do it, even if you're terrified and just paralyzed and having an out-of-body experience until you have this moment where you say, oh my gosh, I'm doing it. Like, I have become this. I am actually doing this. So that's what I did. 5 years in grad school, a few years, I'm at Northwestern, I moved to Harvard. I'm at Harvard, I'm not really thinking about it anymore, but for a long time I had been thinking, not supposed to be here, not supposed to be here. So at the end of my first year at Harvard, a student who had not talked in class the entire semester, who I had said, look, you gotta participate or else you're gonna fail, came into my office. I really didn't know her at all. And she came in totally defeated, and she said, I'm not supposed to be here. And that was the moment for me, because two things happened. One was that I realized, oh my gosh, I don't feel like that anymore. I don't feel that anymore, but she does, and I get that feeling. And the second was, she is supposed to be here. Like, she can fake it, she can become it. So I was like, yes, you are. You are supposed to be here, and tomorrow you're gonna fake it, you're gonna make yourself powerful, and you're gonna, and you're gonna go into the classroom, and you are gonna give the best comment ever, And she gave the best comment ever, and people turned around, they were like, oh my God, I didn't even notice her sitting there, She comes back to me months later, and I realized that she had not just faked it till she made it, she had actually faked it till she became it. So she had changed. And so I want to say to you, don't fake it till you make it, fake it till you become it. It's not do it enough until you actually become it and internalize. The last thing I want to leave you with is this: tiny tweaks can lead to big changes. So this is 2 minutes. 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. Before you go into the next stressful, evaluative situation, for 2 minutes, try doing this in the elevator, in a bathroom stall, at your desk behind closed doors. That's what you want to do. Configure your brain to cope the best in that situation. Get your testosterone up, get your cortisol down. Don't leave that situation feeling like, oh, I didn't show them who I am. Leave that situation feeling like, oh, I really feel like I got to say who I am and show who I am. So I want to ask you first, both to try power posing, and also I want to ask you to share this science, because this is simple. I don't have ego involved in this. Give it away, share it with people, because the people who can use it the most are the ones with no resources and no technology and no status and no power. Give it to them, because they can do it in private. They need their bodies, privacy, and 2 minutes, and it can significantly change the outcomes of their life. Thank you.
Today I got to style some spring moments with some fab DSW shoes. Shoes are one of my favorite accessories because they always complete the vision. Fancy shoes can go from a big day to every day. Let your fancy shoes steal the show, especially with a jean. That's my fave.
On October 10th, Philip sparked a new beginning. Starting over with a little nudge from his Talkspace therapist, Matthew. Talkspace. Get personally matched today with a therapist who can give you a little help too.
All right. Back to our reading. In this, we're looking at the different types of nonverbal communication. We're looking at describing similarities and differences among 8 different types of nonverbal communication. Now that we've discussed the general principles and applied to nonverbal communication, let's examine 8 types of nonverbal communication. To further understand this challenging aspect of communication, we have space, time, physical characteristics, body movements, touch, paralanguage, artifacts, environment. Space. When we discuss space in nonverbal context, we mean the space between objects and people. Space is often associated with the social rank, and it's an important part of business communication. Who gets the corner office and why is the head of the table is important? Who gets there? People from diverse cultures have different normative space expectations. If you're from a large urban area, having people stand close to you may be normal. If you're from rural areas or a culture where people expect more space, somebody may be standing too close to comfort and not know it. We have Edward T. Hall serving as the European and South Pacific regions of the Corps of Engineers during World War II. Traveled around the globe, and as he moved from one place to another, he noticed that people in different countries kept different distances from each other. In France, they stood closer to each other than they did in England, and Hall wondered why it was, and he began to study what he called proxemics, or the study of human use of space and distance in communication. Hall E.T., 1963, Pronemics, the study of man's spatial relations and boundaries. Hidden dimensions, he indicated that there were two main aspects of space, territory and personal space, and Hall drew on anthropology to address the concepts of dominance and submission, and he noted that the more powerful person often claims more space, and this plays an important role in the modern society and who gets the corner office and how we negotiate the space between vehicles, and road rage is increasingly common. There's overcrowding occurs, and the more vehicles occupy the same roles, tensions over the space are predictable. Territory is related to control as a way of establishing control over your own room. Maybe you painted it as your favorite color or put up posters that represent your interests or things that you consider unique about yourself. Families or households often mark their space by putting up fences or walls around the houses. This sense of right to control your space is explicit to the territory. Territory means a space that you claim as your own or responsible for or you're willing to defend. The second aspect of Hall highlights personal space or a bubble of space surrounding each individual. As you walk down a flight of stairs, which side do you choose? We may choose the right side because we learned is what is expected, and people are coming up with the same stair, chose their right. The right choice ensures that personal space is not compromised. What happens when some comes up the wrong side? They violate the understood rules of movement and often correct themselves. But what happens if they don't change lanes and the people move up and down the stairs? They may get dirty looks or even get bumped as people in the crowd handle the invasion of their space. There are no lane markers, and the bubbles of space around each person move with them, allowing for possibility of collision. We recognize the basic need for personal space, but the normative expectations for space vary greatly by culture. You may perceive that in your home, people sleep one to each bed, but in many cultures, people sleep two or three to a bed, and it's considered normal. If you were to share a bed, you might feel uncomfortable, while somebody raised in a group sleeping norms might feel uncomfortable sleeping alone. From where you stand in the aerobics class in relation to others, to where you place your book bag in class, your personal experiences in space are often a variance with others. That's a good point. I mean, sometimes when you go to a aerobic class or like an exercise class, you might find yourself standing in a particular area, and then a new person comes and they're standing in your area. You feel like you're kind of territorial, like this is my spot, but they don't know because they're brand new, right? So sometimes if I'm new, I'm like, hey, is it okay if I stand here? And like, usually they're like, yeah, sure. So that's the awkwardness if you join a new class, because you might have your favorite spot and somebody might be there. And another one, when we think about it, is sleeping. I know for me, I like to sleep by myself because I'm a mover. Like, I don't know why, but when I'm in the middle of sleeping, I do like yoga poses and I'll end up like being like practically, halfway around my bed already by the morning time because I'm just used to moving a lot. So I find myself doing yoga poses while I'm sleeping. Right. So, but other people, they like to sleep with people because they like to be warm. Maybe in their culture, they slept with their brothers and sisters or their mom or dad. Sometimes with big families, you don't have a choice because maybe you have like 8 people and you only have 4 beds. So that may be something that happens. Some people have bunk beds, like beds on top of each other. In the context of a staircase as norms from nonverbal behavior, so does the public speaking context. In North America, eye contact with audience expected. Big movements, gestures are not generally expected and can be distracting. The speaker occupies a space on the stage, even if it's in front of the class. When you occupy that space, the audience will expect to behave in certain ways. If you even talk to the screen behind you while displaying a PowerPoint presentation, the audience may perceive you as not paying attention to them. Speakers are expected to pay attention to and interact with the audience, even if the feedback is primarily nonverbal. Your movement should coordinate with the tone, the rhythm, and the context of your speech. Pacing back and forth, keeping your hands in your pockets or crossing your arms may communicate nervousness or even defensiveness and detract you from your speech. Here's a little diagram on the side here about space, the 4 main categories of distance. As a general rule, try to act naturally. If you were telling a friend a story so that your body will relax and your nonverbal gestures come more naturally, practice is the key to your level of comfort, and the more practice you get, the more comfortable and less intimidating it will seem to you. This is from Space 4 Main Categories of Distance from Hidden Dimensions. Do you know what time it is? Are you aware of the time varies from the culture and normative expectations of adherence or ignorance time? Some people and communities, cultures they represent are called time orientated. The Euro Railways trains in Germany are famous for departing and arriving according to the schedule. In contrast, if you take the train to Argentina, you'll find the schedule is more approximation of when the train will leave or arrive. Time is money. It's common saying across many cultures and reveals high value of time. In social context, it reveals social status and power. Who are you willing to wait for? A doctor in the office, visit your sick, a potential employer for job interview, your significant other, or children. Sometimes we get impatient, and our impatience underscores our value for time. When you're given a presentation, does your audience have to wait for you? Time is a relevant factor of communication process in your speech. The best way to show your audience the respect is to honor the time and expectation associated with your speech. Always try to stop speaking before the audience stops listening. If the audience perceives that you have gone over time, they will be less willing to listen, and this will turn into a negative impact of your ability to communicate your message. Suppose you're presenting a speech with 3 points. The audience expects you to regulate the time and attention to each point. But if you spend all your time on the 2 points and rush through the third, your speech won't be balanced and you're gonna lose your rhythm. And the speaker occupies a position of power, but its audience gives them that position. And by displaying the respect and maintaining balance, you'll be able to move your points effectively. You have chronemics, a study of how we prefer to and perceive time. And Tom Bernew of the Radford University has spent a lifetime investigating how time interacts in communication and culture. You have Time and Verbal Communication, Journal of Popular Culture. Here we have the value of the speed of the highly prized in societies. Does everyone live in the fast lane? In other words, there's a great respect for slowing down and taking long-term view of time. When you wait for a meal at a fast food restaurant, what are the expectations? How long you're going to have to wait? When you order your pizza aligned for delivery, when you expect it to arrive? If you order cable service from your home, when do you expect it to be delivered? In the first case, you might measure a delivery of a hamburger in the matter of seconds or minutes, and perhaps 30 minutes for pizza delivery. But you may measure the time from your order to working cable in days or even weeks. You may even have to be at your home from 8 a.m. to noon waiting for installation. Expectations vary by context, and we often grow frustrated in a time-sensitive culture when the delivery does not match our expectations. We also have physical characteristics. You didn't choose your birth and your eye color or your height, but people spend millions each year trying to change their physical appearance. You can get colored contacts, you can dye your hair, you can even shorten than you like to be, shorten your hair, buy some shoes to raise your stature a couple inches. You won't be able to change your birth, no matter how much you stoop to appear shorter. You won't change your height until time and age gradually make you feel apparent. If you are tall, you might have the correct shoe size, pant length, and even length of mattress, a challenge, but there are rewards. Have you ever heard that taller people get paid more? Mean Genes, From Sex to Money to Food, Taming Our Primal Instincts. That's a book. And there is some truth in the idea. It may come true to the notion that people prefer symmetrical faces where both sides are equal over asymmetrical, like unequal sides, like a crooked nose or having one eye or ear slightly higher than the other. And mean genes. We often make judgment about a person's personality or behavior based on physical characteristics. And researchers are quick to note these judgments are often inadequate. We have stereotypes, psychology, the eye of the beholder, susceptibility of sexism and beautyism in evaluation of managerial applicants. Regardless of your eye or hair color or how tall you are, being comfortable with yourself is an important part of your representation. Act naturally and consider aspects of your presentation so you can control the order to maximize a positive image in the audience. Body movement. The study of body movements called kinesthetics is a key to understanding nonverbal communication. And body movements can complement the verbal message by reinforcing the main idea. So you may be providing an orientation presentation to a customer about software program. As you say, click on this tab, you may also initiate the action. Your verbal and nonverbal message reinforce each other. You can also reinforce the message by repeating it. If you say click on the tab and then you motion your hand to the right, indicate the customer should move the cursor arrow around the mouse to the tab. Your repetition can help the listener understand the message. In addition to repeating your message, body movements can also regulate conversation. Nodding your head to indicate you're listening may encourage the customer to continue asking questions. Holding your hand up, palm out, may signal them to stop and provide them where you can start into the answer. This is how you can spot a liar.
Okay, now I don't want to alarm anybody in this room, but it's just come to my attention that the person to your right is a liar. Also, the person to your left is a liar. Also, the person sitting in your very seats is a liar. We're all liars. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you what the research says about why we're all liars, how you can become a lie spotter, and why you might want to go the extra mile and go from lie spotting to truth seeking, and ultimately to trust building. Now, speaking of trust, ever since I wrote this book, Lie Spotting, no one wants to meet me in person anymore. No. They say, it's okay, we'll email you. I can't even get a coffee date at Starbucks. My husband's like, honey, deception. Maybe you could have focused on cooking. How about French cooking? So before we get started, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clarify my goal for you, which is not to teach a game of gotcha. Lie spotters aren't those nitpicky kids, those kids in the back of the room that are shouting, gotcha, gotcha. Your eyebrow twitched, you flared your nostril, I watched that TV show, lie to me, I know you're lying. No. Lie spotters are armed with scientific knowledge of how to spot deception. They use it to get to the truth, and they do what mature leaders do every day. They have difficult conversations with difficult people, sometimes during very difficult times. And they start up that path by accepting a core proposition. And that proposition is the following: lying is a cooperative act. Think about it. A lie has no power whatsoever by its mere utterance. Its power emerges when someone else agrees to believe the lie. So I know it may sound like tough love, but look, if at some point you got lied to, it's because you agreed to get lied to. Truth number one about lying: lying's a cooperative act. Now, not all lies are harmful. Sometimes we're willing participants in deception for the sake of social dignity, maybe to keep a secret that should be kept secret, secret. We say, nice song. Honey, you don't look fat in that, no. Or we say, favorite of the digerati. You know, I just fished that email out of my spam folder. I'm so sorry. But there are times when we are unwilling participants in deception, and that can have dramatic costs for us. Last year saw $997 billion in corporate fraud alone in the United States. That's an eyelash under $1 trillion. That's 7% of revenues. Deception can cost billions. Think Enron, Madoff, the mortgage crisis, or in the case of double agents and traitors like Robert Hansen or Aldrich Ames, lies can betray our country. They can compromise our security. They can undermine democracy. They can cause the deaths of those that defend us. Deception is actually serious business. This con man, Henry Oberlander, he was such an effective con man, British authorities say he could have undermined the entire banking system of the Western world. And you can't find this guy on Google. You can't find him anywhere. He was interviewed once, and he said the following. He said, look, I've got one rule. And this was Henry's rule. He said, look, everyone is willing to give you something. They're ready to give you something for whatever it is they're hungry for. And that's the crux of it. If you don't want to be deceived, you have to know, what is it that you're hungry for? And we all kind of hate to admit it. You know, we kind of wish we were better husbands, better wives, smarter, more powerful, taller, richer, the list goes on. Lying is an attempt to bridge that gap, to connect our wishes and our fantasies about who we wish we were, how we wish we could be, with what we're really like. And boy, are we willing to fill in those gaps in our lives with lies. On a given day, studies show that you may be lied to anywhere from 10 to 200 times. Now, granted, many of those are white lies. But in another study, it showed that strangers lied 3 times within the first 10 minutes of meeting each other. Now, when we first hear this data, we recoil. We can't believe how prevalent lying is. We're essentially against lying. But if you look more closely, the plot actually thickens. We lie more to strangers than we lie to coworkers. Extroverts lie more than introverts. Men lie 8 times more about themselves than they do other people. Women lie more to protect other people. If you're in an average married couple, you're going to lie to your spouse in 1 out of every 10 interactions. Now, you may think that's bad. If you're unmarried, that number drops to 3. Lying's complex. It's woven into the fabric of our daily and our business lives. We're deeply ambivalent about the truth. We parse it out on an as-needed basis, sometimes for very, very good reasons, and other times just because we don't understand the gaps in our lives. That's truth number 2 about lying. We're against lying, but we're covertly for it in ways that our society has sanctioned for centuries and centuries and centuries. It's as old as breathing. It's part of our culture. It's part of our history. Think Dante, Shakespeare, the Bible, news of the world. Lying has evolutionary value to us as a species. Researchers have long known that the more intelligent the species, the larger the neocortex, the more likely it is to be deceptive. Now, you might remember Coco. Does anybody here remember Coco the gorilla, who was taught sign language? Coco was taught to communicate via sign language. Here's Coco with her kitten. It's her cute little fluffy pet kitten. Coco once blamed her pet kitten for ripping a sink out of the wall. We're hardwired to become leaders of the pack. It starts really, really early. How early? Well, babies will fake a cry, pause, wait to see who's coming, and then go right back to crying. 1-year-olds learn concealment. 2-year-olds bluff. 5-year-olds lie outright. They manipulate via flattery. 9-year-olds, masters of the cover-up. By the time you enter college, you're going to lie to your mom in 1 out of every 5 interactions. By the time we enter this work world, and we're breadwinners, we enter a world that is just cluttered with spam, fake digital friends, partisan media, ingenious identity thieves, world-class Ponzi schemers, a deception epidemic. In short, what one author calls a post-truth society. It's been very confusing for a long time now. What do you do? Well, there's steps we can take to navigate our way through the morass. Trained lie spotters get to the truth 90% of the time. The rest of us, we're only 54% accurate. Why is it so easy to learn? Well, they're good liars and they're bad liars. They're no real original liars. We all make the same mistakes. We all use the same techniques. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 2 patterns of deception, and then we're going to look at the hot spots and see if we can find them ourselves. We're going to start with speech.
I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman. Ms. Lewinsky, I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never. These allegations are false, and I need to go back to work for the American people. Thank you.
Okay, what were the telltale signs? Well, first we heard what's known as a non-contracted denial. Studies show that people who are overdetermined in their denial will resort to formal rather than informal language. We also heard distancing language, that woman. We know that liars will unconsciously distance themselves from their subject using language as their tool. Now, if Bill Clinton had said, well, to tell you the truth, or Richard Nixon's favorite, in all candor, he would have been a dead giveaway for any lie spotter that knows that qualifying language, as it's called, qualifying language like that, further discredits the subject. Now, if he had repeated the question in its entirety, or if he had peppered his account with a little too much detail, and we're all really glad he didn't do that, he would have further discredited himself. Freud had it right. Freud said, look, there's much more to it than speech. No mortal can keep a secret. If his lips are silent, he chatters with his fingertips, and we all do it. No matter how powerful you are, we all chatter with our fingertips. I'm going to show you Dominique Strauss-Kahn with Obama, who's chattering with his fingertips. Now, this brings us to our next pattern, which is body language. With body language, here's what you got to do. You really got to just throw your assumptions out the door. Let the science temper your knowledge a little bit. Because we think liars fidget all the time. Well, guess what? They're known to freeze their upper bodies when they're lying. We think liars won't look in the eyes. Well, guess what? They look you in the eyes a little too much just to compensate for that myth. We think warmth and smiles convey honesty, sincerity, but a trained lie spotter can spot a fake smile a mile away. Can you all spot the fake smile here? You can consciously contract the muscles in your cheeks, but the real smile's in the eyes. The crow's feet of the eyes, they cannot be consciously contracted, especially if you overdid the Botox. Don't overdo the Botox. Nobody will think you're honest. And now we're going to look at the hot spots. Can you tell what's happening in a conversation? Can you start to find the hot spots to see the discrepancies between someone's words and someone's actions? Now, I know it seems really obvious, but when you're having a conversation with someone that you suspect of deception, attitude is by far the most overlooked but telling of indicators. An honest person is going to be cooperative. They're going to show they're on your side. They're going to be enthusiastic. They're going to be willing and helpful in getting you to the truth. They're going to be willing to brainstorm, name suspects, provide details. They're going to say, hey, maybe it was those guys in payroll that forged those checks. They're going to be infuriated if they sense they're wrongly accused throughout the entire course of the interview, not just in flashes. They'll be infuriated throughout the entire course of the interview. And if you ask someone honest, what should happen to whoever did forge those checks? An honest person is much more likely to recommend strict rather than lenient punishment. Now, let's say you're having that exact same conversation with someone deceptive. That person may be withdrawn, look down, lower their voice, pause, be kind of herky-jerky. Ask a deceptive person to tell their story. They're going to pepper it with way too much detail in all kinds of irrelevant places. And then they're going to tell their story in strict chronological order. And what a trained interrogator does is they come in, and in very subtle ways, over the course of several hours, they will ask that person to tell their story backwards. And then they'll watch them squirm and track which questions produce the highest volume of deceptive tells. Why do they do that? Well, we all do the same thing. We rehearse our words, but we rarely rehearse our gestures. We say yes, we shake our heads no. We tell very convincing stories, we slightly shrug our shoulders. We commit terrible crimes, and we smile at the delight in getting away with it. Now, that smile is known in the trade as duping delight, and we're going to see that in several videos moving forward, but we're going to start. For those of you that don't know him, this is presidential candidate John Edwards, who shocked America by fathering a child out of wedlock. We're going to see him talk about getting a paternity test. See now if you can spot him saying yes while shaking his head no, slightly shrugging his shoulders, lots of
I'd be happy to participate in one. I know that it's not possible that this child could be mine because of the timing of events, so I know it's not possible. Happy to take a paternity test and would love to see it happen.
Are you going to do that soon? Is there somebody that you can't?
I'm only one side. I'm only one side of the test, but I'm happy to participate in one.
Okay, those head shakes are much easier to spot once you know to look for them. Now, there are going to be times when someone makes one expression while masking another that just kind of leaks through in a flash. Murderers are known to leak sadness. Your new joint venture partner might shake your hand, celebrate, go out to dinner with you, and then leak an expression of anger. And we're not all going to become facial expression experts overnight here, but there's one I can teach you that's very dangerous and that's easy to learn, and that's the expression of contempt. Now, with anger, you've got two people on an even playing field. It's still somewhat of a healthy relationship, but when anger turns to contempt, you've been dismissed. It's associated with moral superiority, and for that reason, it's very, very hard to recover from. Here's what it looks like. It's marked by one lip corner pulled up and in. It's the only asymmetrical expression, and in the presence of contempt, whether or not deception follows, and it doesn't always follow, look the other way, go the other direction, reconsider the deal, say, no, thank you, I'm not coming up for just one more nightcap, thank you. Science has surfaced many, many more indicators. We know, for example, liars will shift their blink rate, point their feet towards an exit. They will take barrier objects and put them between themselves and the person that's interviewing them. They'll alter their vocal tone, often making their vocal tone much lower. Now, here's the deal. These behaviors are just behaviors. They're not proof of deception. They're red flags. We're human beings. We make deceptive, flailing gestures all over the place all day long. They don't mean anything in and of themselves. But when you see clusters of them, that's your signal. Look, listen, probe, ask some hard questions, get out of that very comfortable mode of knowing, walk into curiosity mode, ask more questions. Have a little dignity. Treat the person you're talking to with rapport. Don't try to be like those folks on Law and Order and those other TV shows that pummel their subjects into submission. Don't be too aggressive. It doesn't work. Now, we've talked a little bit about how to talk to someone who's lying and how to spot a lie. And as I promised, we're now going to look at what the truth looks like. And I'm going to show you two videos. Two mothers. One is lying, one is telling the truth. And these were surfaced by researcher David Matsumoto in California. And I think they're an excellent example of what the truth looks like. This mother, Diane Downs, shot her kids at close range, drove them to the hospital while they bled all over the car, claimed a scraggy-haired stranger did it. And you'll see when you see the video, she can't even pretend to be an agonizing mother. What you want to look for here is an incredible discrepancy between horrific events that she describes and her very, very cool demeanor. And if you look closely, you'll see duping delight throughout this video.
But at night, when I close my eyes, I can see Christy reaching her hand out to me while I'm driving, and the blood just keep coming out of her mouth. And that, maybe it'll fade too with time, but I don't think so. That haunts me the most.
Now I'm going to show you a video of an actual grieving mother, Erin Runyon, confronting her daughter's murderer and torturer in court. Here you're going to see no false emotion, just the authentic expression of a mother's agony.
I wrote this statement on the 3rd anniversary of the night you took my baby. And you hurt her, and you crushed her, you terrified her, until her heart stopped. And she fought, and I know she fought you. I know she looked at you with those amazing brown eyes, and you still wanted to kill her. And I don't understand it, and I never will.
Okay, there's no doubting the veracity of those emotions. Now, the technology around what the truth looks like is progressing on, the science of it. We know, for example, that we now have specialized eye trackers, infrared brain scans, MRIs that can decode the signals that our bodies send out when we're trying to be deceptive. And these technologies are going to be marketed to all of us as panaceas for deceit. And they will prove incredibly useful someday. But you've got to ask yourself, in the meantime, who do you want on your side of the meeting? Someone who's trained in getting to the truth, or some guy who's going to drag a 400-pound electroencephalogram through the door? Lie spotters rely on human tools. They know, as someone once said, characters who you are in the dark. And what's kind of interesting is that today we have so little darkness. Our world is lit up 24 hours a day. It's transparent, with blogs and social networks broadcasting the buzz of a whole new generation of people that have made a choice to live their lives in public. It's a much more noisy world. So one challenge we have is to remember, oversharing, that's not honesty. Our manic tweeting and texting can blind us to the fact that the subtleties of human decency, character, integrity, that's still what matters. That's always what's going to matter. So in this much noisier world, it might make sense for us to be just a little bit more explicit about our moral code. When you combine the science of recognizing deception with the art of looking, listening, you exempt yourself from collaborating in a lie. You start up that path of being just a little bit more explicit because you signal to everyone around you. You say, hey, my world, our world, it's going to be an honest one. My world is going to be one where truth is strengthened and falsehood is recognized and marginalized. And when you do that, the ground around you starts to shift just a little bit. And that's the truth. Thank you.
Why is Roger happy? It's the little things Carvana does, like giving him a real offer in 2 minutes. And Carvana's customer advocate, Caitlin, picking up his car at promptly 10 a.m., then paying him right there on the spot. We'll drive you happy at Carvana.
I grew up with my identical twin, who was an incredibly loving brother. Now, one thing about being a twin is it makes you an expert at spotting favoritism. If his cookie was even slightly bigger than my cookie, I had questions. And clearly, I wasn't starving. When I became a psychologist, I began to notice favoritism of a different kind. And that is how much more we value the body than we do the mind. I spent 9 years at university earning my doctorate in psychology, and I can't tell you how many people look at my business card and say, oh, a psychologist, so not a real doctor. As if it should say that on my card. This favoritism, we show the body over the mind. I see it everywhere. I recently was at a friend's house and their 5-year-old was getting ready for bed. He was standing on a stool by the sink, brushing his teeth, when he slipped and scratched his leg on the stool when he fell. He cried for a minute, but then he got back up, got back on the stool, and reached out for a box of Band-Aids to put one on his cut. Now, this kid could barely tie his shoelaces, but he knew you have to cover a cut so it doesn't become infected, and you have to care for your teeth by brushing twice a day. We all know how to maintain our physical health and how to practice dental hygiene, right? We know it since we were 5 years old. But what do we know about maintaining our psychological health? Well, nothing. What do we teach our children about emotional hygiene? Nothing. How is it we spend more time taking care of our teeth than we do our minds? Why is it our physical health is so much more important to us than our psychological health? You know, we sustain psychological injuries even more often than we do physical ones, injuries like failure or rejection or loneliness. And they can also get worse if we ignore them, and they can impact our lives in dramatic ways. And yet, even though there are scientifically proven techniques we could use to treat these kinds of psychological injuries, we don't. It doesn't even occur to us that we should. Oh, you're feeling depressed. Just shake it off. It's all in your head. Can you imagine saying that to somebody with a broken leg? Oh, just walk it off. It's all in your leg. It is time we close the gap between our physical and our psychological health. It's time we made them more equal, more like twins. Speaking of which, my brother is also a psychologist, so he's not a real doctor either. We didn't study together, though. In fact, the hardest thing I've ever done in my life is move across the Atlantic to New York City to get my doctorate in psychology. We were apart then for the first time in our lives, and the separation was brutal for both of us. But while he remained among family and friends, I was alone in a new country. We missed each other terribly, but international phone calls were really expensive then, and we could only afford to speak for 5 minutes a week. When our birthday rolled around, it was the first we wouldn't be spending together. We decided to splurge, and that week we would talk for 10 minutes. I spent the morning pacing around my room, waiting for him to call, and waiting, and waiting. But the phone didn't ring. Given the time difference, I assumed, okay, he's out with friends, he'll call later. There were no cell phones then. But he didn't. And I began to realize that after being away for over 10 months, he no longer missed me the way I missed him. I knew he would call in the morning, but that night was one of the saddest and longest nights of my life. I woke up the next morning. I glanced down at the phone, and I realized I had kicked it off the hook when pacing the day before. I stumbled out of bed, I put the phone back on the receiver, and it rang a second later. And it was my brother. And boy, was he pissed. It was the saddest and longest night of his life as well. Now, I tried to explain what happened, but he said, I don't understand. If you saw I wasn't calling you, why didn't you just pick up the phone and call me? He was right. Why didn't I call him? I didn't have an answer then, but I do today, and it's a simple one. Loneliness. Loneliness creates a deep psychological wound, one that distorts our perceptions and scrambles our thinking. It makes us believe that those around us care much less than they actually do. It makes us really afraid to reach out, because why set yourself up for rejection and heartache when your heart is already aching more than you can stand? I was in the grips of real loneliness back then, but I was surrounded by people all day, so it never occurred to me. But loneliness is defined purely subjectively. It depends solely on whether you feel emotionally or socially disconnected from those around you, and I did. There is a lot of research on loneliness, and all of it is horrifying. Loneliness won't just make you miserable, it will kill you. I'm not kidding. Chronic loneliness increases your likelihood of an early death by 14%. 14%. Loneliness causes high blood pressure, high cholesterol. It even suppresses the functioning of your immune system, making you vulnerable to all kinds of illnesses and diseases. In fact, scientists have concluded that taken together, chronic loneliness poses as significant a risk for your long-term health and longevity as cigarette smoking. Now, cigarette packs come with warnings saying this could kill you, but loneliness doesn't. And that's why it's so important we prioritize our psychological health, that we practice emotional hygiene, because you can't treat a psychological wound if you don't even know you're injured. Loneliness isn't the only psychological wound that distorts our perceptions and misleads us. Failure does that as well. I once visited a daycare center where I saw 3 toddlers play with identical plastic toys. You had to slide the red button and a cute doggy would pop out. One little girl tried pulling the purple button, then pushing it, and then she just sat back and looked at the box with her lower lip trembling. The little boy next to her watched this happen, then turned to his box and burst into tears without even touching it. Meanwhile, another little girl tried everything she could think of until she slid the red button, the cute doggy popped out, and she squealed with delight. So 3 toddlers with identical plastic toys, but with very different reactions to failure. The first two toddlers were perfectly capable of sliding a red button. The only thing that prevented them from succeeding was their mind, tricked them into believing they could not. Now, adults get tricked this way as well all the time. In fact, we all have a default set of feelings and beliefs that gets triggered whenever we encounter frustrations and setbacks. Are you aware of how your mind reacts to failure? You need to be. Because if your mind tries to convince you you're incapable of something and you believe it, then like those two toddlers, you'll begin to feel helpless and you'll stop trying too soon, or you won't even try at all. And then you'll be even more convinced you can't succeed. You see, that's why so many people function below their actual potential. Because somewhere along the way, sometimes a single failure convinced them that they couldn't succeed, and they believed it. Once we become convinced of something, it's very difficult to change our mind. I learned that lesson the hard way when I was a teenager with my brother. We were driving with friends down a dark road at night when a police car stopped us. There had been a robbery in the area and they were looking for suspects. The officer approached the car and he shined his flashlight on the driver, then on my brother in the front seat, and then on me, and his eyes opened wide and he said, "Where have I seen your face before?" And I said, "In the front seat." But that made no sense to him whatsoever, so now he thought I was on drugs. So he drags me out of the car, he searches me, he marches me over to the police car, and only when he verified I don't have a police record could I show him I had a twin in the front seat. But even as we were driving away, you could see by the look on his face, he was convinced that I was getting away with something. Our mind is hard to change once we become convinced. So it might be very natural to feel demoralized and defeated after you fail, but you cannot allow yourself to become convinced you can't succeed. You have to fight feelings of helplessness. You have to gain control over the situation. And you have to break this kind of negative cycle before it begins. Our minds and our feelings, they're not the trustworthy friends we thought they were. They're more like a really moody friend who can be totally supportive one minute and really unpleasant the next. I once worked with this woman who, after 20 years of marriage and an extremely ugly divorce, was finally ready for her first date. She had met this guy online, and he seemed nice, and he seemed successful, and most importantly, he seemed really into her. So she was very excited. She bought a new dress, and they met at an upscale New York City bar for a drink. 10 minutes into the date, the man stands up and says, "I'm not interested," and walks out. Rejection is extremely painful. The woman was so hurt she couldn't move. All she could do was call a friend. And here's what the friend said. "Well, what do you expect? You have big hips, you have nothing interesting to say. Why would a handsome, successful man like that ever go out with a loser like you?" Shocking, right, that a friend can be so cruel. But it would be much less shocking if I told you it wasn't the friend who said that. It's what the woman said to herself. And that's something we all do, especially after a rejection. We all start thinking of all our faults and all our shortcomings, what we wish we were, what we wish we weren't. We call ourselves names, maybe not as harshly, but we all do it. And it's interesting that we do, because our self-esteem is already hurting. Why would we want to go and damage it even further? Right? We wouldn't make a physical injury worse on purpose. You wouldn't get a cut on your arm and decide, "Oh, I know, I'm going to take a knife and see how much deeper I can make it." But we do that with psychological injuries all the time. Why? Because of poor emotional hygiene. Because we don't prioritize our psychological health. We know from dozens of studies that when your self-esteem is lower, you are more vulnerable to stress and to anxiety, that failures and rejections hurt more, and it takes longer to recover from them. So when you get rejected, the first thing you should be doing is to revive your self-esteem, not join Fight Club and beat it into a pulp. When you're in emotional pain, treat yourself with the same compassion you would expect from a truly good friend. We have to catch our unhealthy psychological habits and change them. And one of the unhealthiest and most common is called rumination. To ruminate means to chew over. It's when your boss yells at you, or your professor makes you feel stupid in class, or you have a big fight with a friend, and you just can't stop replaying the scene in your head for days, sometimes for weeks on end. Now, ruminating about upsetting events in this way can easily become a habit, and it's a very costly one. Because by spending so much time focused on upsetting and negative thoughts, you are actually putting yourself at significant risk for developing clinical depression, alcoholism, eating disorders, and even cardiovascular disease. The problem is, the urge to ruminate can feel really strong and really important, so it's a difficult habit to stop. I know this for a fact, because a little over a year ago, I developed the habit myself. You see, my twin brother was diagnosed with stage 3 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. His cancer was extremely aggressive. He had visible tumors all over his body. And he had to start a harsh course of chemotherapy. And I couldn't stop thinking about what he was going through. I couldn't stop thinking about how much he was suffering. Even though he never complained, not once. He had this incredibly positive attitude. His psychological health was amazing. I was physically healthy, but psychologically I was a mess. But I knew what to do. Studies tell us that even a 2-minute distraction is sufficient to break the urge to ruminate in that moment. And so each time I had a worrying, upsetting, negative thought, I forced myself to concentrate on something else until the urge passed. And within 1 week, my whole outlook changed and became more positive and more hopeful. 9 weeks after he started chemotherapy, my brother had a CAT scan, and I was by his side when he got the results. All the tumors were gone. He still had 3 more rounds of chemotherapy to go, but we knew he would recover. This picture was taken 2 weeks ago. By taking action when you're lonely, by changing your responses to failure, by protecting your self-esteem, by battling negative thinking, you won't just heal your psychological wounds, you will build emotional resilience, you will thrive. You know, 100 years ago, people began practicing personal hygiene, and life expectancy rates rose by over 50% in just a matter of decades. I believe our quality of life could rise just as dramatically if we all began practicing emotional hygiene. Can you imagine what the world would be like if everyone was psychologically healthier? If there were less loneliness and less depression? If people knew how to overcome failure? If they felt better about themselves and more empowered? If they were happier and more fulfilled? I can, because that's the world I want to live in. And that's the world my brother wants to live in as well. And if you just become informed and change a few simple habits, well, that's the world we can all live in. Thank you very much.
Okay, and that was how to predict emotion. Not this one. All right, so we have touch. That's the next category. Touch and communication is interaction called haptics. And William Seller and Les Belsire, communication making connections. So we have functional, professional touch, like a medical examination, physical therapy, sports coach, maybe music teacher, and we have the physical, the social polite touch, like a handshake. We have friendship, warm touch, like a hug, You have love, intimacy, maybe a kiss between family members, romantic partners. We have sexual arousal, that's like caressing and intercourse. Before giving a presentation, you may interact with people by shaking hands and making casual conversation. You have something called paralanguage. Paralanguage is the exception of a definition of nonverbal communication. You may recall what we define nonverbal communication as not involving words, but paralanguage exists when we are speaking using para words. Paralanguage involves the verbal and nonverbal aspects of speech that influence meaning, including tone, intensity, pausing, and even silence. Perhaps you heard a pregnant pause, like the silence between verbal messages, which is full of meaning. The meaning itself can be hard to understand or decipher, but it's nonetheless. For example, your coworker Jen comes back from a sales meeting speechless with a ghost white complexion. You ask how the meeting went, and well, maybe your only response that you get, the pause speaks volumes. Something happened, although you may not know what it is. It could be a personal. If Jan's report was not well received, it could be more systematic, like news sales figures are off by 40% and pink slips may be not far behind. You have artifacts. Here's some examples of artifacts. Do you know that cover your tattoos when you're at work? Some jobs make you cover tattoos. I know like Disneyland was really adamant about tattoos being covered. Whereas you could be a nurse at the hospital, an LVN or an RN, you can have tattoos at like a memorial hospital. When I was working at Everest College, we had to have sweaters on. You weren't allowed to show like skin because I guess some girls like to wear spaghetti strap dresses. I had a spaghetti strap dress, but I always wear sweaters with my dresses. That's just the thing, how I am. I mean, I think spaghettis are great if you're at the beach, but if you're like teaching or if you're a student and you're learning, then maybe it could not be like the proper attire. So maybe you have to cover it up. If you're wearing a sweater, then nobody has to worry because you're already covered up. Expectations vary in a great deal, but the body art of tattoos is still conversational in the workplace. And 20% of workers indicate their body art have been held against them on the job. 42% of employers said the presence of invisible art lowered their opinion of the workers, and 44% of managers surveyed have body art. 42% of workers surveyed have body art, and then 67% of workers who have body art piercing covers remove them during the work hours. Artifacts can be any form of like a decorative ornamentation chosen to represent self-concept. They can include rings, tattoos, but also include brand names and logos for clothes and cars, watches, briefcases, purses, and eyeglasses. What we choose to surround ourselves communicate something about our self-identity, and they project a gender, a role or position, class or status, personality, group membership, and affiliation. And paying attention to customers, artifacts can give you a sense of self. They want to communicate and may allow you more accurately to adapt your message to the environment. Environment involves the physical and psychological aspects of communication context. Nonverbal communication can be categorized into 8 types: space, time, physical characteristics, body movements, touch, paralanguage, artifacts, and environment. Okay, so we have nonverbal, 8 categories: space, time, physical characteristics, body movements, touch, paralanguage, artifacts, and environment. We have demonstrate how to use movement to increase effectiveness of presentation. Positions of the stage, me put a video on. This is a really good video about like spies knowing, the nonverbal. FBI agent explains about your body language.
Maybe it's another refill at your favorite diner, or waiting for the 712 bus.
Nonverbals are anything that communicates but is not a word. The public knows them as body language. How we dress, how we walk, have meaning, and we use that to interpret what's in the mind of the person. My name is Joe Navarro, and for 25 years I was a special agent with the FBI. My job was to catch spies. Most of my career I spent within the National Security Division. A lot of it had to do with looking at specific targets, and then it was about, well, how do we get in their heads and how do we neutralize them? Our security is based on nonverbals. We look at the person through the peephole. We look at who's behind us at the ATM machine. We know from the research that most of us select our mates based on nonverbals. So we may think we're very sophisticated, but in fact, we are never in a state where we're not transmitting information. There's a lot of myths out there. The ones that stand out is if you cross your arms, that it's a blocking behavior. That's just nonsense. Even when you don't like the person that is in front of you, this isn't to block them out. It's actually to self-soothe, because in essence, it's a self-hug. When you're sitting at a movie and you're watching, you're going to cross your arms. You're waiting for somebody, you tend to do this. What's interesting is we do this behavior more in public than in private. The other one that really stands out is as we think about something, we may look in a certain way. As we process the information, we may look in another way. It's certainly not indicative of deception, and it really shouldn't be used that way. All we can say is the person is processing the information. The other misconceptions are that if the person clears their throat, touches their nose, or covers their mouth, they're lying. We do these behaviors as self-soothers. They're pacifying behaviors. Scientifically and empirically, there's just no Pinocchio effect. And people who prattle that and say, well, we can detect deception because the person touches their nose or covers their mouth, that's just sheer nonsense. We humans are lousy at detecting deception. Espionage work is often nowhere near what we see in movies. And in one of the cases, we had information from another country saying, you have an American we think is actually a mole who somehow entered the United States, is able to pass as an American, but he's here working for a hostile intelligence service. And just fortuitously, he was videographed coming out of a flower shop. We're looking at the video, and everybody in our small unit, we were saying, well, there's not much there. You know, he's coming out of the shop, getting in his car. And I said, stop the film right there. Just as he came out of the shop, he took the flowers, and most Americans tend to hold the flowers by the stalk so that the flowers are up. This individual took them and grabbed the stalk and then held the flowers so that they were facing down. And I said, that's how they carry flowers in Eastern Europe. Rather than confront him about, are you a spy, I decided to do what's called a presumptive. So as I sat there with him, I said, would you like to know how we know? And he had this look on his face, and I said, it was the flowers. And then he confessed. When I came into law enforcement, I thought it was all about the confession. It's really about FaceTime. In my 25 years in the FBI, it was a rarity that a person didn't eventually reveal what I needed to know, because we would sit down and have these very lengthy conversations. I look at behaviors to do an assessment. What is this person transmitting in relation to any stimuli? My further questioning comes from my observing these behaviors. The first thing I look at is I look at the hair. Does it look healthy? Does it look well-groomed? The forehead is very interesting because a lot of times we reveal stress. A lot of the things that we have gone through life are often etched in the forehead. I look at the eyes to see if they're red or not enough sleep. This small area here between the eyes called the glabella, it's one of the first areas that reveals information to us. Most often when we don't like something, we do that bunny nose of I don't like. We don't really know what our lips look like, and we tend to compress them. When something bothers us, when something really bothers us, we tend to suck them in. The mandibula, and look at the cheeks. We may do something like this. We'll rub our tongue against the inside of the cheek. But when we try to hide it, then it tells me that this person is trying to do some perception management. And if they are, I want to know why. At the neck, I want to see if there's any head tilt. Because head tilt, the person is more relaxed. The minute the head tilt goes away, there's usually some issue. I'm looking at the shoulders. You ask somebody a question and they don't know, both shoulders shoot up very quickly. And then I look at the hands. When something's troubling us, we tend to stiffen our fingers, interlace them, and almost like a teepee, we move our hands back and forth very slowly. This is to be differentiated from when we do the steeple, which we do in this position. When something's at issue, we tend to put our hands on our hips and we become very territorial. This is called arms akimbo. But look how it changes when we put our thumbs forward, and then it becomes one of more of I'm inquisitive. But I also look for any behaviors of ventilating, because men tend to ventilate at the neck, and we do at the very instant something bothers us. And then I look at the legs to see if there's any brushing of the legs with the hands, which is, again, to pacify. And then the feet. Do I see any behaviors such as wiggling of the feet, kicking of the feet? If I ask a question and all of a sudden the feet withdraw and are crossed, perhaps the person feels a little threatened by that question. So when we study nonverbals, it's not about making judgments. It's about assessing what is this person transmitting in that moment. It really is looking at an individual and saying, what are they transmitting? We're all transmitting at all times. We choose the clothes that we wear, how we groom ourselves, how we dress, but also how do we carry ourselves? Are we coming to the office on this particular day with a lot of energy, or are we coming in with a different sort of pace? And what we look for are differences in behavior down to the minutia of what is this individual's posture as they're walking down the street? Are they on the inside of the sidewalk, on the outside? Can we see his blink rate? Can we see how often he's looking at his watch? I know your blink rate is around eight times a minute, but you don't know that. You're not sitting there counting. All these things factor in because they're transmitting information. Now it's up to us to then use that information to say, okay, we need to marshal resources to be on that individual right now. So in most Western cultures, the first time people touch is when they shake hands. Touching becomes that important because we can always remember a time when we shook hands with someone and we didn't like that. It's also the first time when our bodies release these bonding chemicals that say, I like this person or I don't like this person. So handshaking is both necessary and essential in most cultures. All right.
Pigeons are supposed to be like dirty birds. Nobody actually ever, got them as a pet.
Ladies, hi, I'm Joe Navarro.
Joe, I'm Laura.
Laura,
Nice to
how are
meet
you? And you are? Khadija, how are you? Okay. Let me ask you this. Let's back up a little bit. Is this comfortable for you?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a little bit more comfortable. But it's not for you, is it? Nope. All right, thank you. All right, so keep talking. What we've done here is we've talked about the importance of space and comfort. They don't realize is how much further apart they are now standing. And it's because we have brought this subject up to make them comfortable about saying, hey, it's okay to be comfortable at your perfect distance. And so now we see when they rock away from each other and they create this space. If you notice, their feet tend to move around more. There's a dynamic going on here where they're kind of trying to find, well, what is the perfect space? What is the perfect distance? And we know that they're unsettled because of the high degree of movement that's going on.
Dove knows we damage our hair a lot.
My hair, I curl it. I have to use a lot of heat.
New Dove Hair Therapy shampoo and conditioner with ceramide and peptide. It nourishes at a cellular level to rescue damaged hair. Discover 10 times stronger hair with new Dove Hair Therapy Rescue and Protect.
Poker's an interesting game. The similitudes of sitting across from a spy or sitting across from players, it's their reactions to a stimulus. We have behaviors indicative of psychological discomfort that we use at home, at work, or at the poker table. So we're going to take a look at poker players and some of the body language that you'll find at a typical poker game. So we'll pause it right there. So one of the things that you first notice is that when a table is called, this is the first time many of them see each other. This is a great opportunity to be looking for behaviors indicative of discomfort. We're going to see the individual shifting in his chair. We're going to see one individual reaching over and grabbing his shoulder. The woman in this case, her shoulders are rather high. This is a great opportunity, even before the game starts, to collect poker intelligence.
All right, guys. Button is good.
Button is good. Let's do
So we'll stop right there. Look where their hands are at. Here we're looking at player number 2 and number 3, and we notice right away that their hands are on top of the cards. Some players will cage their cards. Some players will put their hands directly on top and press them down. And they may do that because the cards have now increased in value. Player number 1 tends to keep his hands very close to his body. Player number 4, she's actually withdrawn her hands from the table because when we like things, we tend to move our hands forward. When we don't like things, we tend to move the hands away.
These guys are my cards.
So as we look at player number 3, I'm often asked about players who shuffle their chips. What you're really doing is self-soothing, and this just helps you to make it through the game, and that's really all we're looking for.
Oh, come on.
Okay, so we'll stop right there. Player number 5 is sitting there, arms crossed. You don't see a lot of activity. That doesn't mean he's not transmitting a lot of information. On down the line, I want to see where those thumbs of his are, because he holds them very close when nothing's going on. But does that change as the game evolves? If you're looking at nonverbals, it's often useful to look at them at double the speed because all the nonverbals that are critical jump out at you as though it were a caricature. All right, so stop right there. The woman in position number 4, you see her head moving around quite a bit. Player number 3, you see a lot of activity with his hands. When we look at player number 5, now his hands are fully out. This is as far as we've seen them before. At this point, we know that he's engaged and that he's interested. Now the game is out in the open. 75 to 80% of the information we need is sitting out there. What you often see is everybody's looking at their own cards or looking at the community cards rather than looking around. You should be looking around to see, well, what was the reaction, because you're going to see that reaction again. You know, in poker, we used to say that you can have a poker face, but I countered you can't have a poker body. Somewhere it's going to be revealed. When I was in college in the early 70s, there were really no courses on nonverbal communications. You quickly realize that, to a great extent, it's really about what you can interpret from behavior. And so we talk about nonverbals because it matters, because it has gravitas, because it affects how we communicate with each other. When it comes to nonverbals, this is no small matter. We primarily communicate nonverbally, and we always will.
Give me one of your McNuggets.
Si quieres un McNugget, just ask for it.
Oh, did I say that or did I think it?
Enjoy any two favorites for just $6 for a limited time at McDonald's.
People that are supremely confident, when they enter the room, they feel comfortable in that room. They don't hesitate to look around. Their gestures are smooth, but they're very broad. And that has to do with confidence. And for a lot of people, this is very difficult. I remember the great actress Helen Mirren saying, one of the most difficult things to learn as an actress is how to walk onto a scene. I've thought about that even in my career, how early on, the difficulty of mastering that. How do you walk onto a crime scene? How do you walk into the public and demonstrate that I am confident and so forth? We can all work a little bit on our nonverbal so we come across as more confident. When we talk about confidence, it's so many things. It has to do with our posture, the way we present, how we look. Where's our chin? Where are the eyes looking and gazing? Our gestures are loose, but they're smoother. As we walk about, we walk as though we are on a mission. I'm walking out to shake your hand, or I'm walking out to a podium, or I'm walking to where I'm going to sit. So the less confident we are, the less eye contact we make. The less confident we are, the more reluctant we are to look about. You know, when I look at someone I admire, like Colin Powell, when he walks onto a stage, even before he speaks, he has total command of the room, and he does that because he brings two things into this equation. One is a tremendous amount of knowledge and experience, plus he has shaped and defined himself into a statesman.
We've got to think of America as a family, where every member of the family cares about every other member of the family.
I think sometimes people mistake machismo or theatrical displays of power as confidence. Confidence can be very quiet. Jane Goodall, here's this ethologist, very meek, very mild, and yet wherever she goes, she commands the room. One of the things you notice is they sort of have this command of themselves, and in doing so, that command transmits outward. The other thing that confident people realize is the temporal aspect of leadership. If you're in charge of time. I'm going to take my time to walk out. I'm going to take my time to answer your question. I will answer it in the pace, manner, and tone that I choose. And in doing that, we are demonstrating that we are confident and in control. Where do we get that confident voice? Where do we get those confident gestures? This is what's called socialization. We notice the principal who acts this way. We like this leader because of this or that trait. So I try to model their behaviors and say, this is a shortcut. And if I have to work on my vocabulary, that's what high status people do. If I have to change my gestures to fit in this society, and then that's what I'm going to have to do. That doesn't mean it changes me completely. It just means that this is what is required of me, and this is what I want to achieve at this moment in time. I think of Cary Grant. Here's an individual born in the UK, grew up very poor, and as he said in his biography, I became Cary Grant. I adopted all the behaviors that I saw from high status individuals.
Just think about that, but make up your mind.
And it is difficult to prescribe this, but one of the easiest things that we can do, you know, if you're a woman, maybe you want to model yourself on the actress Cate Blanchett or some other actor and say, you know, when they're being interviewed, how do they look? They look so confident. They look interesting. They have such a command presence. You know, we're not born this way. These are things that we have to develop and say, how do I want to be perceived? And what can I do to achieve that? Are there better behaviors that you can do? Here's a simple one. How many of you, somebody says, where'd they go? And you go like this. And as it turns out, this is one of the most hated signs around the world.
Maybe it's another refill at your favorite diner, or waiting for the 7:12 bus, or Sunday afternoon in the produce aisle. These moments may not seem remarkable, but at Pfizer, protecting the regular routine in every day drives us to reach for exceptional. Working to impact hundreds of millions of lives, young and old. It's what we call the pursuit of normal.
It starts with little things, little things.
And yet, if we just go like this, he went that way, we're already perceived differently. Little things. I tell the story often of when I first came into law enforcement. They said, well, you've got to get out there and make some arrests. And the first time I went out there and my voice just went really high. Stop, you're under arrest. That sounds horrible. And you have to work at having that command presence where you say, stop right there. Don't move. That's almost theatrical, yeah, but it's what is needed. So let's do this exercise. I want you to say no. Just go ahead, say it out loud. All right, now let's do it right. Say it as I say it. No. 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 Do you see the difference between the way you said it and this way? Did you notice that your voice kept getting deeper? But did you also notice that the fingers became wider and wider? The more confident you became, the wider your fingers were spreading. There's a big difference between saying no, stop, and going, no, stop. This potentiates the message. But to get to this, we actually have to practice it. So let's do it again. No. Now go out there and teach your children how to do that.
I love sometimes selfies in the mirror.
One of my pet peeves is what we hear every day with what's called uptalk. Uptalk is where someone says something and then they end making it sound like a question mark. So it sounds like this. 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent, upon this continent a new nation. My company has done research on this, and we've asked CEOs and we've asked executives, and some will say, well, I've gotten used to it and so forth. But when we ask them, does it really matter? They also, yeah, we'd rather not see it. I get pushback from people that say, well, this is just the way that I speak, and no doubt, but don't expect the same results.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills.
The cadence in our speech is extremely powerful for a couple of reasons. One, we know that when people machine gun a statement, when they talk very fast, we are less likely to listen to them over a long period of time. But when we talk In cadence, we are sort of held still, listening to what will come next. And I'll give you an example from that great speech Martin Luther King gave. As you notice with the cadence, I have a dream.
I have a dream.
And then he pauses. That one day.
One day.
And then he goes on. And Churchill used the same thing. Churchill's notes literally would create spaces for how long he would pause.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent.
These pauses make people listen. And one of the things that we teach is if you want people to listen to you, use cadence to get their attention, hold their attention, but then look forward to what that next set of words will be. It lets them know at a subconscious level, this is the person in charge. And we know that they're in charge because they have temporal control over this. They're not in a hurry. So, a lot of times people say to me, well, does confidence look like, chest out, shoulders back, chin up? Yeah, that looks pretty good. But, a lot of times confidence is just sitting comfortably in a chair. And that may have more to do with how much space you control. It may have to do with the gestures that you use. You probably noticed that I use a lot of steepling. I tend to interlace my fingers and so forth. These are gestures that contribute to that communication that I'm trying to get across, that I am confident about what I'm talking about. So it's not just about puffing your chest out, or certainly not about talking louder or anything. It's about controlling my environment, but making sure that what I'm transmitting at all times is confidence. And that means I'm prepared. I'm ready to answer. I'm going to answer you now. I'm going to answer you effectively. And I'm going to make sure that you understand what I said. I'm here to convey. I'm not here to convince. A lot of times people who are lacking confidence are trying to convince you of something. Hey, if I'm confident, I just say it once. It's this way and that's it. I convey the information rather than sit there and try to beat it into you by repeating it 10 different ways. Compare the gestures I'm about to do. It's about temporal movement, controlling time, so the person in charge has the time to look up at their own pace. The gestures are smooth. There's no hesitation. There's no quick movements. There's no jitteriness. There doesn't have to be. I'm in charge. When I feel less confident, I feel like I have to be in a hurry, that I've got to look up and I've got to answer right away. And there's a lot of preening behaviors, and these are detracting from me.
I was really shy a few years ago. Probably this is changing a little bit.
People are horrified to speak in public. I used to be horrified to speak in public. I still get nervous to speak in public. But here's some tricks I found that you might find useful. The first one is don't hesitate ever to say, you know what, this is scary. Be honest with yourself. This is unnatural. Number two, take refuge in knowing that if I sit down and study this material, I will know it better than my audience. The third thing I always do is I rehearse. It really helps so that the first time you hear it in a forum, it doesn't scare you. When it's time to do the presentation, one of the things I like to do is to warm up. I find a good solid wall and I will just lean into it like I'm holding this wall up, pressing against it just as if I were doing a push-up. And one of the things that does is it releases a lot of muscular tension. And because I'm doing it very wide, it makes me feel more powerful. And I need to walk on that stage as though it's mine with full confidence. It is only then that I look at my audience. And then I just take a second to get myself together and to begin. With practice, obviously, you're going to get better and better and better. Let's face it, people are not born confident. They're just not. We can become confident with the assistance of our parents who encourage us. We can become confident through our own achievements. We can become confident by going beyond our boundaries. But confidence is something that we can grow, we can nurture. I mean, I have seen people in wheelchairs that are supremely confident. I have seen elderly people in their 90s who are very confident. I've seen children who are holding a violin with such confidence. If you want to be confident, know your material. Know the information, hone that skill, work at it, have that mastery of things and of self, and that's how you will come across as confident, no matter what your station in life is.
Right. Yeah, gesture, positions on stage, gestures, anticipation step. Gesture clearly shows the audience your anticipation of upcoming points, serving as a nonverbal form of foreshadowing. Implementation step, when it comes to the next, using your arms and hands above your waist. You can do a relaxation step, facial gestures, eye contact. All those are really important when we want to gain the speaker's trust and vice versa. We also have visual aids. Almost all presentations can be enhanced by some kind of effective use of visual aids. Visual aids is great. We can think about doing that. You want to make your speech more interesting, enhance your credibility as a speaker, service as guides as transitions, helping the audience stay on track, communicate complex and intriguing information in a short period of time, reinforce your verbal message, and help audiences use and retain information. Methods and materials, you may choose to use a chart or diagram to show a timeline of events to date from the first meeting about proposed product to the results of the latest focus group. The timeline may work for you, but it may say you would like to get into the actual decision-making process that motivated your team to design the product with specific features in first place. You may decide to use a decision trees or tree diagram showing the variables and the products in place at the beginning of your discussion, and then how each decision led to the next, bringing you the decision point, breaking where you are today. You could use visual aids, use of color. Strategically chosen visual aids will serve to illustrate, complement, and reinforce your verbal message. Nonverbal strategies for success with your audience, watch reactions, market research is fundamental to success in business and industry. So too, you're going to need a bit of field research to observe how, when, and why people communicate the way they do. If you want to be able to communicate effectively with customers, you're going to need to anticipate not only their needs, but also how they communicate. And they are far more likely to communicate with somebody whom they perceive as being like them than with perceived stranger. And from dress to mannerisms and speech patterns, you can learn from your audience how to be a more effective business communicator. Use nonverbal communication to enhance your message. Watch reactions and consider enrolling an observer to help you be aware of your own verbal habits and how your audience receive nonverbal messages. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you so much, everybody, for doing an amazing job, and I will see you next time. Bye now.